Meghan is livid. Harry has met someone who is his age, with whom he is in love, and who is in love with him.
One word. That is all it took to unravel this entire story. Not heartbroken, not devastated, not inconsolable, livid. When a wife discovers her husband has fallen for someone else, you expect grief. You expect tears. You expect the kind of quiet collapse that happens behind closed doors when everything you built with someone crumbles in your hands. But that is not what happened inside that house in Montecito. What happened was fury. And fury, if you understand anything about how power works inside a relationship, tells you something grief never could. It tells you what was actually at stake. Not love, not a family, a brand. By the time this video ends, you will know exactly what that word means, why it changes everything you thought you understood about Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, and why the biggest revelation in this entire story has nothing to do with an affair at all. It involves those children. It involves the line of succession to the British throne. And it involves United States government-level sources who have now chosen to speak. Stay with me. This goes somewhere the mainstream will not follow. Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, has met another woman. She is his age. She lives in or near Montecito, California. She is financially independent, well-connected, moves in circles of wealth and influence without needing any of those things to define who she is. She understands his world without being consumed by it. And according to multiple verified sources, she and Harry are in love with each other. People close to the situation have confirmed it. People have seen them together. Nobody knows how long this has been going on. Now, before any of this went public, the sourcing was tested against the most aggressive legal standard available. Every angle of legal exposure was calculated. Every piece of the machinery that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have repeatedly shown they are willing to deploy against anyone who crosses them, from tabloid lawsuits to family denunciations to cease and desist letters, all of it was weighed. And the conclusion was that this information was completely bulletproof. Here is why. Under British defamation law, accusing a married person of having a sexual affair outside of their marriage can be considered defamatory. The standard of the reasonable person, what British courts sometimes call the person on the London omnibus, kicks in. If such an accusation harms someone's reputation in the eyes of ordinary right-thinking members of society, it can form the basis of a successful lawsuit. That is why the claim was stated with such meticulous precision. Nobody used the word affair. What was described was two healthy, vigorous adults in their 40s who are in love with each other. What do adults who are in love do? Discuss Kant and Schopenhauer? Of course not. But there is no crime in being in love with someone irrespective of your marital status. That is the actual legal position. And it is airtight. The implication was unmistakable. The liability was zero. Then came the sources. And this is where you need to sit up and pay full attention, because the sourcing changes everything about how you should receive this information. These were not anonymous tipsters from the murkier corners of the internet. These were not disgruntled palace staff with axes to grind or scores to settle. United States government-level contacts, liberal Democrats, verifiable, traceable individuals with official positions and real professional accountability. People who came forward completely unsolicited. People who had witnessed what was happening firsthand and chose to speak because they knew the information would be verified down to the last detail before it was ever made public. These were not people who had anything to gain from fabrication. These were people who had seen something and decided on their own initiative that it needed to be known. And the fact that they are described as liberal Democrats matters enormously, because Meghan Markle has publicly and repeatedly aligned herself with progressive political causes and democratic political circles in the United States. If people from within her own ideological camp are now choosing to speak against her, to bring forward information that could dismantle the narrative Meghan has constructed in America, that tells you something seismic about how thoroughly the perception has shifted. When your own side starts talking, the walls have not started closing in. They have already fallen. And here's the detail that reframes absolutely everything else in this story. Nobody knows how long Harry has known this woman. Not weeks, not necessarily months. Nobody knows. And that single unanswered question retroactively changes the meaning of every headline, every solo appearance, every empty seat beside Meghan Markle for the past 12 months or more. Every time you saw a photo of Harry at one event and Meghan at another and told yourself it was just scheduling, just professional separation, just two very busy people living very modern lives, you may have been looking at something completely different, something nobody was willing to name. Let me ask you something. Do you remember the Oprah Winfrey interview, March of 2021? 73.9 million viewers across platforms worldwide? Harry holding Meghan's hand across those garden chairs in the fading California light, telling the world she was his person, that they were a united front against a system that had failed them both. That leaving the royal family was their only option, that this woman beside him was worth everything he had sacrificed. Hold that image in your mind right now. Hold it carefully. Let it crystallize. Now hold the word livid right next to it. Something never added up. You felt it. You might not have been able to name it, but you felt it. Meghan found the text messages herself, on Harry's phone. And her reaction, confirmed by the very same sources who revealed the existence of this other woman, was livid, not heartbroken. Not shattered. Not the slow, awful crumbling that happens when you realize the person you love is in love with someone else. Livid, furious, cold, concentrated, strategic fury. But here is the part most people completely miss. And this is the line that made me stop and read it 3 times when I first encountered it. She was livid, but not enough to give up on her brand, which includes Harry's connection to King Charles III. Read that slowly. Let every word register. That is not a woman losing her marriage. That is a woman assessing damage to a business arrangement and calculating whether the remaining assets justify continued investment. And if that distinction does not send a chill down your spine, you have not been paying close enough attention to how this entire operation has worked from the very beginning. This is where I want to introduce a framework that I think helps explain everything that has happened over the past several years. Not as a series of random events or personal dramas, but as a coherent pattern with its own internal logic. I call it the dual-purpose marriage. One layer is the relationship people see, the hand-holding. The interviews, the Netflix cameras capturing intimate moments that are somehow always perfectly lit and perfectly framed. The other layer is the business architecture underneath. The deals, the brand partnerships, the intellectual property, the access, and the question that has haunted every honest observer of this marriage since roughly 2020 is, which layer came first? Which layer is the real structure and which is the facade painted over it? The word livid answers that question. A wife who discovers her husband has feelings for someone else and responds with heartbreak is operating in the emotional layer. A wife who discovers the same thing and responds with fury calibrated against her brand equity is operating in the business layer. And Meghan, according to every source that has spoken, responded in the business layer. Want to know if a marriage is actually falling apart? Forget the press statements. Forget the carefully worded denials from unnamed representatives. Forget the friendly puff pieces placed in sympathetic outlets. Read the calendar. Geneva, alone. Chicago, alone. A museum gala, alone. A children's hospital fundraiser, alone. A charity dinner, alone. A red carpet appearance, alone. A tribute to Tyler Perry, alone. More than 40 days without a single shared public appearance. 40 days. For context, that is longer than the entire public courtship of many Hollywood couples. A couple who sat in front of Oprah Winfrey and told the watching world they were inseparable. 40 days of silence that spoke louder than any interview ever could. And it is not just the number, it is the pattern within the number. Look at which events each of them chose to attend alone. Harry gravitated toward military and veterans events. Meghan gravitated toward fashion, entertainment, and media events. They did not just stop appearing together. They divided the territory. They carved up the portfolio of public appearances like two business partners dissolving a joint venture and splitting the client list. That is not a couple going through a rough patch. That is a separation in everything but legal name. Meanwhile, Harry keeps returning to Britain, without Meghan, without Archie, without Lilibet, to a country he publicly described as too dangerous for his family. He fought a legal battle to retain taxpayer-funded security for his visits. He testified in court about the threat level his family faces on British soil, and then he keeps coming back, alone. Every single time he arrives, observers notice the exact same transformation. The stiffness in his shoulders loosens. The rehearsed media vocabulary, the American therapy speak he adopted after moving to California, fades. Something uncoils in him every time he steps off a plane at Heathrow. As if the person he has been pretending to be in Montecito cannot survive the flight across the Atlantic, he looks lighter, more relaxed, more like the man people remember from before all of this started. The man who cracked jokes with soldiers, the man who hugged veterans without a camera crew in tow, the man who felt like a real person, not a brand ambassador for a lifestyle company. Now, fold the mystery woman into that picture. She lives in the Montecito area. She understands Harry's world, the weight of royal expectations, the permanent glare of public attention, the impossible task of being a normal person inside an abnormal life without being consumed by it, without needing to monetize it, without wanting to turn it into content. People have seen them together. They have managed to evade cameras so far, with nobody knowing how long this connection has existed. Think about what that level of discretion requires in a place like Montecito, a small, wealthy enclave on the California coast where everybody knows everybody, where the local coffee shop is a better intelligence network than most government agencies. That level of secrecy is not accidental. It is a deliberate, sustained effort by two people who clearly know what would happen the moment a single photograph surfaced. There was even talk of a vow renewal being quietly floated, a public ceremony to paper over the cracks. Think about what that signals. You only reach for a vow renewal when people have already started questioning whether the original vows still mean anything at all. It is not a celebration. It is damage control dressed up in white. It is a press release disguised as a sacrament. But here is where I need you to set aside the gossip and think about the architecture of what is happening, because the structural separation goes far deeper than a calendar of solo events. Separate Instagram accounts, separate Netflix development deals, separate professional brands, separate social media identities built around completely separate narratives. Meghan launched a lifestyle brand. Harry launched mental health and veterans initiatives. They did not just stop appearing together publicly. They stopped building together. Everyone politely called it a professional arrangement. Very modern, very mature. A power couple who understood that independence is the new togetherness, but you do not untangle your entire public life from someone you are still genuinely in love with. You do not construct two parallel identities, two separate content pipelines, two distinct audience demographics, unless the unity was always more useful than it was honest. These separate lives did not begin with a text message found on a phone. They began with a spreadsheet and a business plan. And once you see it that way, you cannot unsee it. Here is the part most coverage of this story gets completely wrong, and I want you to hear this clearly because it matters. Too many commentators keep presenting Prince Harry as someone who simply lost his way. A kind, bumbling, good-hearted man who meant well and got pulled somewhere he never intended to go. A victim of circumstance, of manipulation, of forces larger than himself. Your instinct that this is not the complete picture has always been right. Harry is not a victim in this story. He is a participant, a grown man who made choices publicly, repeatedly, and with full knowledge of their consequences. He signed the Netflix deals. He sat in front of Oprah. He wrote the memoir called Spare, disclosing the most intimate details of his entire family, private conversations with his father, King Charles, confrontations with his brother, Prince William, the deepest wounds of his childhood and his mother's death, for global consumption and a reported $20 million advance. He chose every single one of those actions. Nobody forced his hand on any of it. But the pattern goes further back than California, further back than Meghan. And this is where the story becomes genuinely uncomfortable for anyone who has held on to the idea of Harry as a fundamentally good man who simply made some poor choices under pressure. Chelsea Davy. They were together for roughly 7 years, on and off, starting in 2004. She was warm, unpretentious South African, an adventurous spirit who did not particularly care about the royal machinery and was not intimidated by it. By all accounts, from people close to the situation, Harry loved her a great deal. She loved him back. They had genuine fun together. She fit into his world easily, without needing to reshape it around herself. Harry testified under oath during the phone hacking trial against Mirror Group newspapers that relentless media intrusion destroyed that relationship. He spoke about surveillance, about private moments becoming public spectacles, about the impossible strain of loving someone when every dinner, every holiday, every private disagreement might end up on a front page. There is real truth in that testimony. The British tabloid press was vicious. They were invasive. They caused genuine harm to real people. But people who actually followed that relationship closely at the time tell a different, quieter, less sympathetic part of the same story. Harry was not faithful to Chelsea. He had affairs with other women while they were together. Not one lapse, a pattern. She found out. She got upset. He did not come to see her for extended periods. She waited. She forgave. He did it again. Eventually, after years of this cycle, she went off and left him. According to people who were close to the situation and had direct knowledge of what happened inside that relationship, the destruction was entirely his own doing, not the tabloids, not the palace. Not the impossible pressure of royal life, him. Then came Cressida Bonus, introduced to Harry in 2012 by Princess Eugenie. She watched what had happened to Chelsea. She watched the media cycle that consumed Chelsea's life. She looked clearly at the road ahead if she stayed, at the compromises required, at the person Harry had shown himself to be when the cameras were not watching, and she walked away before the same thing could happen to her. Two women who both genuinely cared about him, both left because of who he actually was when no cameras were pointed in his direction. You watched him serve in Afghanistan, you saw the photographs, you heard him talk about the clarity he found in uniform, in a place where he could be judged on what he did rather than who he was born to be. You watched him build the Invictus Games and felt something genuine about what he created for wounded veterans from around the world. The games held in London in 2014, then Orlando, then Toronto, then Sydney, The Hague, Dusseldorf. A genuine, meaningful initiative that brought together former service members from dozens of countries and gave them something most of them had lost after their injuries, a sense of competition, of camaraderie, of purpose. That version of Harry was real, the soldier, the founder, the man who hugged a double amputee at the finish line and both of them cried and nobody who watched could doubt for a single second that what they were seeing was real. But so is the version who was unfaithful to Chelsea. So is the version who sat in front of Oprah and disclosed private conversations his family had shared in confidence. So is the version who wrote a memoir that treated the most painful moments of his brothers' and father's lives as publishing content. These are not two different people. They are the same person. And pretending one version cancels out the other is the exact kind of thinking that has allowed him to avoid real accountability for the better part of a decade. He did not stumble into this situation, he built it. Piece by piece, choice by choice, interview by interview. Now here is something that makes the current situation even more extraordinary. And this is the part that should disturb anyone who has followed this story closely. The Invictus Games. The one thing the entire world agreed Harry did that was genuinely good. The cause that moved hardened journalists to genuine tears. The organization he founded from the ground up to honor wounded veterans. That organization told Meghan she could not come to recent events. She was not simply absent, she was banned. Let that sink in. The single most universally praised accomplishment of Harry's life, the thing no critic could touch, the unassailable moral high ground of his entire public identity, banned his wife from attending. And insiders went further than that. The Invictus organizers are reportedly horrified by Harry's own recent public behavior. His language during a podcast appearance, the crudeness of it. The complete gap between the dignity of everything Invictus represents, the sacrifice of soldiers who lost limbs and eyes in years of their lives, and the way Harry chose to present himself publicly. That is not a small development. That is the collapse of the last remaining pillar holding up what was left of public sympathy for Harry. Let me take you to Paris for a moment. Fashion Week, nighttime. Meghan in the back of a car, feet propped up against the window, filming her shoes, posting it to Instagram as a glamorous travel diary moment. Perfectly curated, perfectly lit, perfectly on brand. The car's route passing within a mile of the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. Most of you watching right now remember where you were on August 31st, 1997. You watched the news break. You watched the flowers pile up outside Kensington Palace, a sea of cellophane and handwritten notes that grew until it covered the ground in every direction. You watched a 12-year-old boy named Harry walk behind his mother's coffin in front of the entire world. Diana, Princess of Wales, killed in a car crash in that tunnel while being pursued by paparazzi photographers through the streets of Paris in the middle of the night. The world watched that boy's face and felt something that has never quite gone away. Harry has spoken publicly many times about what that tunnel means to him. In interviews, in his memoir, in therapy sessions he has described publicly. Stories involving cars and photographers in Paris at night still haunt him. He has said so himself. He was 12 years old when Princess Diana died. Some part of him never stopped being 12 years old when it comes to that tunnel and that night, and the sound of cameras that he has associated ever since with the worst moment of his entire life. That wound never closed. It never will. And there was his wife, feet up, filming her shoes, posting it to social media as if it were a perfectly ordinary, fashionable evening out, as if the geography meant nothing, as if the man she married had not spent 30 years carrying the weight of what happened less than a mile from where she was casually creating content. Her team reportedly said she did not realize where she was. Think about that for 1 second. People who travel at Meghan Markle's level do not travel without advance teams. Routes are planned days in advance. Locations are scouted. Security considerations are mapped. Cultural and personal sensitivities are flagged. That is baseline protocol for anyone at her level of public visibility and anyone married to a member of the British royal family. The question is not whether she knew where she was. The question is how nobody in her entire professional orbit, not a single aide, not a single security officer, not a single member of her staff, flagged the location before she pressed record. Multiple independent commentators reached for the same word when they saw that footage, and it was not a gentle word. This becomes even more striking when you remember that Harry himself appeared on a major British television broadcast saying it was not safe enough for his family to be in the United Kingdom. The country where his mother is buried. The country where his father reigns. Not safe enough. But apparently safe enough for Meghan to be alone in Paris, literally engaging with the paparazzi culture he has said killed his mother, creating social media content a mile from the site of her death. That contradiction does not require analysis. It announces itself. Now place that image directly next to what happened at Highgrove House, King Charles III's country residence in Gloucestershire. The meeting that dominated headlines when it finally materialized. The long-awaited reunion between Harry, Meghan, the children, and the king. Harry went in to see King Charles first, alone. Then the children, Archie and Lilibet, were received. Then, last of all, Meghan was granted entry. For anyone who understands how the palace operates, and I mean truly understands the choreography of royal encounters where nothing is accidental and everything communicates, that sequencing was not a scheduling issue. It was not logistical convenience. It was a statement delivered without a single word spoken publicly. The king received his son. The king received his grandchildren. And the woman who spent years telling the world the palace mistreated her, that the institution was racist, that the family abandoned her, that woman stood outside a closed door and waited her turn. That information did not come from Harry or Meghan. It came from people connected to the royal family who knew exactly what was happening in real time and made absolutely sure the world found out. Meghan reportedly arrived with a list of demands. She left having stood in a corridor while the meeting she wanted to control happened entirely without her. That is not coincidence. That is a message. And the message is not subtle. While we are examining what is real and what is performance, let me take you to The Cooking Show, the Netflix series that an insider I trust described, with a smile, as wonderful for people who struggle to sleep. Meghan's lifestyle and cooking program, the one that by all available metrics performed poorly, the one that audiences did not watch in significant numbers, the one that disappeared from trending lists almost immediately after its release. That show received a Daytime Emmy nomination, and the mechanism behind it was explained to me by a Hollywood contact in terms that left no room for ambiguity. Ted Sarandos, the co-chief executive officer of Netflix, publicly championed Meghan when she first arrived at the platform. He called her influential. He praised her vision. He invested significant resources into her projects. The cooking show failed badly in terms of viewership. To spare himself the professional embarrassment of having backed such a visible, expensive, and publicly discussed flop, efforts were made to secure a nomination. Under the rules governing the Television Academy's Daytime Emmy process, apparently anyone can nominate their own show. The nomination does not require external validation. It requires a submission form and the willingness to submit it. That is standard practice in Hollywood. The question is not whether she received the nomination. The question is whether anyone actually votes for it when the ceremony arrives. Now compare that to the Prince and Princess of Wales, William and Catherine. 2 primetime Emmy nominations for genuine content, real viewership numbers, real audience engagement, earned on actual merit without backstage engineering. The contrast does not need a punchline. It delivers itself. But none of this. Not the Invictus ban, not the Emmy mechanics, not the text messages on Harry's phone, not the Paris tunnel footage, not the Highgrove sequencing. None of it is the story you have been waiting for since the very beginning of this video. At the start, I told you the biggest revelation had nothing to do with the affair. I told you this goes somewhere the mainstream will not follow. Here is where we arrive. The same verified United States government-level sources, liberal Democrats with traceable identities and official positions, who confirmed Harry's new relationship, also brought forward something else entirely. Something that goes far beyond a marriage under strain. Something that sits at the very heart of the British monarchy itself. According to these sources, Lilibet was carried and birthed by a surrogate from the state of Colorado, transferred to Montecito by private jet, prearranged from the very beginning, a non-disclosure agreement signed by every person present at the handover. Now, I need to be precise here, because precision matters more in this section than anywhere else in this entire video. This claim has not been independently verified by any mainstream outlet. For legal reasons, it is being reported as what verified, traceable sources have directly stated, people who have been confirmed to exist. People with official positions and real accountability. People with absolutely nothing to gain from fabricating something of this magnitude, but a claim and a proven fact are different things, and I will not pretend otherwise. What I will say is this. What also matters, what matters enormously, is what has not been denied. Thomas Markle Jr., Meghan's half-brother, has gone on the record stating that Trevor Engelson, Meghan's first husband, told him that Meghan had undergone a hysterectomy. Meghan Markle has never denied this publicly, not once, not through a spokesperson, not through legal counsel, not through any of the channels through which she has aggressively contested dozens of other claims about her over the years. Trevor Engelson has never denied it either. If that medical claim is accurate, and nobody has stepped forward to say it is not, one question follows immediately and unavoidably. If Meghan had a hysterectomy, how exactly did she carry 2 children? Think about the footage that circulated widely online. A video recorded in what appeared to be a hospital setting with what appeared to be a 9-month pregnant belly. Women who have actually been 9 months pregnant watched that footage and responded in their thousands with exactly the same observation. The body does not move that way at full term. The center of gravity shifts so dramatically in the final weeks of pregnancy that the movements visible in that footage become physically impossible. That is not opinion. That is biomechanics. That is how the human body works. And nothing about what appears in that footage is consistent with how a genuinely full-term pregnant body actually behaves. Then consider the Netflix documentary. Meghan and Harry included what appeared to be ultrasound footage to prove that she had carried Archie, but every single identifying feature had been removed. Every one. Think about that choice carefully. If that is a genuine scan of your own baby, why would you strip away the very details that make it identifiable as yours? The date, the patient name, the hospital code, the gestational markers, the metadata that says this scan belongs to this patient at this facility on this date, all of it erased. That is not providing proof. That is creating the appearance of proof while making absolutely certain the proof cannot actually prove anything at all. It is a magic trick performed with medical imagery. Look, here is evidence. But do not look too closely, because we have made sure you cannot verify it. Now, here is where this stops being a tabloid story and becomes something far more serious. Here is where I need you to set aside everything you feel about Harry and Meghan as individuals, as celebrities, as sympathetic or unsympathetic characters in a never-ending drama, and think about this purely as a constitutional matter, because that is exactly what it is. Both Archie Harrison Mountbatten-Windsor and Lilibet Diana Mountbatten-Windsor are in the line of succession to the British throne. Their positions in that line are determined by the Act of Settlement of 1701 and the Succession to the Crown Act of 2013. The legitimacy of every person in that line, their right to potentially sit on the throne of the United Kingdom and the other Commonwealth realms, depends on verifiable biological descent from the sovereign. If any question about the biological origins of a person in the line of succession were ever formally raised, it would not be a tabloid matter. It would not be a social media debate. It would be a matter for Parliament, for the Privy Council, for the constitutional framework that has governed who sits on that throne for over 300 years. This is not without historical precedent. In 1866, a case that became known as the Tichborne Claimant consumed British courts and the British public for years. A butcher from Wagga Wagga, Australia, appeared in London claiming to be Roger Tichborne, the long-lost heir to a baronetcy and a substantial fortune. The case turned entirely on questions of identity, origin, and legitimacy. It was not resolved by gossip. It was not resolved by public opinion. It was resolved by documentation, testimony, physical evidence, and the most rigorous legal scrutiny that Victorian England could bring to bear. The claimant was eventually convicted of perjury and sentenced to 14 years in prison. The point is not the parallel. The point is the principle. Questions about who belongs in the line of succession to the British crown are constitutional questions of the highest order. They do not live in comment sections. They do not dissolve because the mainstream press is too nervous to ask them. They require answers, and those answers require evidence. Consider what happens in any potential divorce proceeding between Harry and Meghan. California is a community property state. Under California family law, assets acquired during a marriage are generally divided equally in a divorce. Harry and Meghan married in May of 2018. They are now approaching the critical threshold of 10 years of marriage. Under California law, that duration changes the calculation for spousal support in significant ways. A marriage of 10 years or longer is classified as a long-duration marriage, and the court retains indefinite jurisdiction over spousal support. That is a financial inflection point with massive implications. But far more significantly than any financial calculation, in any custody battle involving two children who carry royal titles, who are in the line of succession to the British throne, and whose grandfather is the reigning king of the United Kingdom, lawyers start requesting documentation, birth records, hospital admission records, medical histories, evidence of biological origin. The questions that have lived only in comment sections, in YouTube discussions, in social media threads for years would be forced into a courtroom. And courtrooms do not accept non-disclosure agreements as substitutes for real answers. The mainstream media knows all of this. Every royal correspondent, every legal analyst at every major network, every editor at every major newspaper, they know, and I can tell you exactly why they stay silent. They fear losing palace access, the currency that keeps royal correspondents employed and their careers viable. They fear legal exposure from two people who have shown they will litigate aggressively against anyone who says anything they dislike. And they wait for a resolution before reporting the journey. That is standard practice in media. Do not tell the audience the building is on fire until you can also tell them who started it and how it was put out. But the resolution may be arriving whether they are ready for it or not. Because here is the legal principle that underpins everything. Non-disclosure agreements cannot hold silence over the commission of a crime. They never could. An NDA that covers up fraud, deception, or a crime is void and unenforceable under both British and American law. The only question was always who would speak first, and now someone has. And they did not come from the tabloid press. They came from the United States government. I promised you at the start that I would pay off every thread I opened. So let me do exactly that. In order. Every single one. The affair. Harry has allegedly met someone his age in the Montecito area. Financially independent. People have seen them together. Nobody knows how long this has been going on. The information was tested against every inch of British defamation law before it went public. Love was described. A sexual relationship was not. The law was satisfied. The implication was unmistakable. And the fact that nobody from Harry's side has denied it since it surfaced speaks in a frequency that lawyers understand perfectly. The word, livid. Meghan's reaction when she discovered those text messages was not grief, it was fury. And fury, in the context of everything else we now know, reveals a relationship defined not by emotional connection but by strategic utility. She was livid, but not enough to walk away from the brand. From the royal connection, from the access to King Charles that makes everything else in her public life financially and socially possible. That single word, 4 letters, 2 syllables, tells you more about this marriage than 5 years of headlines and 17 hours of Netflix footage ever could. The calendar, more than 40 days of solo appearances, separate events, separate cities, sometimes separate continents. The public separation that everyone could see, but nobody in the mainstream was willing to name for what it was because naming it meant losing access to the people involved. The pattern, Chelsea Davy, Cressida Bonus. 2 women who loved Harry genuinely and left because of who he was when the cameras turned off. His infidelity is not new. It is a pattern that stretches back well over a decade and includes multiple confirmed instances during his longest relationship before Meghan. What is new is that this time, the woman he has apparently turned to seems to represent something he has been searching for his entire adult life and has never managed to find. Someone who understands his world without wanting to consume it, without wanting to monetize it, without wanting to turn him into content. The Highgrove sequencing. King Charles III received Harry first, then the grandchildren, Archie and Lilibet, then Meghan. The palace said everything it needed to say without uttering a single public word. The hierarchy was stated in the order of entry. Meghan Markle stood in a corridor and waited. And the people who ensured the world knew about it did so deliberately, with the precision of a palace communications operation that has been managing public perception for over 1,000 years. The Paris Tunnel. Meghan filming her shoes within a mile of where Princess Diana died on that August night in 1997. Whether she genuinely did not know where she was, which strains belief, or whether her team failed to flag the most emotionally significant location in her husband's entire psychological geography, the result is the same. A failure of empathy so complete that it functions as its own kind of evidence. Evidence of what you can decide for yourself. The Invictus Ban. The organization Harry built for wounded veterans from across the world decided Meghan was not welcome at their events. His own creation rejected her. And reportedly, the same organizers are horrified by Harry's own recent public conduct. The last safe ground, the one thing nobody could criticize him for, has collapsed beneath both of them. The Emmy. Engineered through Hollywood's nomination mechanics by people trying to avoid the embarrassment of a publicly acknowledged failure. A show nobody watched, nominated to protect the reputation of the executive who backed it. Compare it to the earned recognition received by the Prince and Princess of Wales, and the contrast writes its own verdict. No commentary required. And finally, the children. The surrogate claim from government-level sources. The hysterectomy allegation from a family member that has never once been denied by anyone in a position to deny it. The ultrasound footage with every identifying feature stripped. The line of succession implications that make this a constitutional matter, not a tabloid curiosity. The approaching 10-year marriage threshold under California family law, the non-disclosure agreements that cannot survive the light of a courtroom if fraud or crime is involved, and the mainstream media silence that protects access over truth. Every single thread opened at the start of this video has now been closed. But there is one thing I want to leave you with, one image, one final thought to carry with you after this screen goes dark. A 12-year-old boy walking behind his mother's coffin, the whole world watching, cameras clicking, flashbulbs firing, Union flags at half-mast across the Capitol, September 1997. That boy grew up in the glare of those flashbulbs. He served his country in Helmand Province with bullets overhead and sand in his teeth. He built something extraordinary for wounded soldiers who had given parts of their bodies in service to their nations. He fell in love. He fell out of love. He fell in love again with someone the whole world warned him about. He married her anyway. He left his country. He left his family. He left his brother, his father, his grandmother before she died. He made choices, some brave, some reckless, some that will define his legacy in ways he cannot yet comprehend. His father, King Charles III, found comfort outside a struggling marriage with Diana. His mother paid the ultimate price for the public life she was forced to live, dying in a tunnel in Paris while running from cameras at 30 miles per hour in the back of a black Mercedes. And Harry, the boy who was determined to write a completely different story than his parents, may have spent the last decade living that exact same story, just in a different time zone, with different cameras, and with consequences that have not yet fully arrived. The house in Montecito sits on a hillside above the Pacific Ocean. Somewhere nearby, there is apparently a woman who makes him feel something real for the first time in years. Back inside that house, there is a wife who discovered the evidence and felt not heartbreak, but fury. There are 2 children whose origins have now become the subject of claims from United States government sources that nobody in power will publicly address. And there is a throne 3,000 miles and an ocean away whose line of succession runs through that house, whether anyone there wants to acknowledge it or not. This is not the end of this story. This is barely the middle. What happens next depends on courtrooms, on constitutional mechanisms, on whether the silence of non-disclosure agreements can hold when the people who enforce them have already started to speak, and on whether a man who has spent his entire life in the public eye can finally find what he has been searching for since he was 12 years old, standing in a black suit behind a coffin, or whether the pattern that has defined every relationship he has ever had simply repeats itself one more time. You already know what you think. The question is whether you are right, and whether anyone with the authority to give you a real answer will ever actually do it.